Aside from falling and loud noises, all of your fears have been learned. And this is very important to come to terms with and understand the implications of. Because fear tends to dictate what we do and don't do in our life. It plays a big part in our decision making. And we often take these fears for granted. We tend to think that that's just how we're wired, but that would be a mistake. See, that's how we're programmed. We can equate programming in this case with software. Software can be changed. We tend to think that our fears are hardwired, like it's a part of the hardware that can't be changed. Research has told us that that is not true. Other than falling and loud noises, when you are born, you don't have fears. Every other fear you have learned. The actual mechanism of fear is biological. That is our hardware. But what we have grown to become afraid of, what we have learned to fear, is a learned process. Now, what are the implications of this? The fact that you've learned your fears means that you can also unlearn them. This is great news. This is part of why we are here talking about this today. The implications of this also mean that we learned them from somewhere. So how did we learn what to be afraid of? Why are we afraid of some things and not others? And why is your friend maybe not afraid of the things that you're afraid of, and vice versa? Well, there's three main ways that we tend to learn what to fear. There's direct experience. A dog bit you when you were young. You directly experienced that and generalized all dogs equal danger. There's observational learning. Maybe you saw a dog bite someone else and you saw that person cry and experience pain. So you generalized through your observational learning, all dogs equal danger. And there's also cultural transmission, storytelling. So maybe your mother had a direct experience with a dog and passed down the information to you that all dogs equal danger. Now, being afraid of dogs obviously isn't the end of the world. Although, as someone who has two dogs, I would say that's a fear you should learn to get over because they're quite wonderful. But that was just a very simple example. We come to be afraid of things that have meaningful impacts on our life, on what path we decide to choose and which paths we decide to avoid out of fear. So perhaps you're someone who doesn't really expose themselves to trying new things because you have a fear of failure. That is not innate. That is not an instinct, and that can be unlearned. Now, the reason you're afraid of failure, if you are someone who's afraid of failure, is perhaps because you came up in a culture that dictated failure was a bad thing. If you failed a test, it was bad. Maybe you got in trouble at home. So you had direct experience of a result, and culturally, achievement and success is tied to self-worth, and that's been observed by you. And so you have this fear of failure. The impact that that has on you, potentially, is that you avoid pursuing passions. It stifles your creativity and it creates perfectionism. This can obviously impact your ability to live a happy, healthy, authentic, and fully engaged life. Here's another example of a popular fear that is often learned in early childhood and often early adulthood as well. A fear of intimacy and connection and vulnerability with another person. Now, if this is a fear you have, this will drastically affect your ability to have beautiful, connective, intimate relationships with either romantic partners or even deep platonic friendships. And this is you robbing yourself. One of the greatest parts of the human experience is that connection with other people. Perhaps when you were young, you remembered a time when your parents deeply loved each other, and then you saw a lot of fighting and an eventual divorce, and you generalized that to being vulnerable and connective with another human opens up the capacity for deep hurt and pain and suffering. And so you have subconsciously internalized that intimacy is not safe. It's worth noting that often these fears are very subconsciously rooted. And we just tend to assume that these are wired in us, that this is like the way we are. No, this is something that you have learned and you can unlearn it. That's the good news here. So those are a few very common examples: fear of intimacy and fear of failure. And if you have either of those fears have very impactful ramifications on your life. And you might not even realize that those are things you're scared of. Because oftentimes these fears are very subconsciously rooted. You didn't even know that this was something you learned in your life. Especially if it was learned in early childhood, you've just kind of taken it for granted and not really thought about the fact that you can have a different experience of the world. You don't have to suffer in the face of those fears the way that you have been. Perhaps you're not afraid of intimacy or even failure, although I would say most people are, at least on some level. But there's infinite ways that you have likely adopted some kind of fear that is holding you back in one way or another. So you can go ahead and reflect on what it is that you're afraid of. This might be a very long list, it might be a very short list, and come to know why it is that you've learned to be afraid of that. This is going to give you the best chance at being able to unlearn those fears. So if you recognize that you have a fear of intimacy because you saw a culture full of failed relationships and a 50% divorce rate, well, you can take the time to look on the other side of that. Wait a second. Successful relationships also exist. I just need to learn the skills necessary to live in a successful relationship, just as an example. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. The whole idea behind this channel is to help you gain more self-awareness in a very practical way that's going to help you live a happier and more fulfilled life. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, be sure to subscribe for more content like this. And there's also going to be a couple links in the description, one for a free life audit workbook, which is a great resource to make meaningful changes in your life. And the other one is for a free coaching call with me. So if that's something that you're interested in, be sure to check those links out down in the description. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.